H.R. 3688, which the clerk will report.
Counter number 480, H.R. 3688, an act to implement the United States-Peru Trade Promotion Agreement.
Under the previous order, there will be 90 minutes of debate equally divided.
Mr. President, I just want to say a few words as to why I am strongly opposed to the Peru Free Trade Agreement. And some of the points that I made last night, but I think that they bear reiteration. And that is the untold story of the economy in the United States is that the middle class is shrinking, poverty is increasing, and the gap between the rich and the poor is growing much, much wider. I am not going to sit here and tell you that trade is the only reason why the middle class is shrinking, but I am going to tell you it is a major reason, and it's an issue that we have got to deal with. Mr. President, since George W. Bush has been in office, 5 million Americans has slipped out of the middle class and into poverty. 8.5 million Americans have lost their health insurance. Median household income for working-age families has gone down by nearly $2,500. Over 3 million good-paying manufacturing jobs have been lost. 3 million Americans have lost their pensions. Wages and salaries are now at their lowest share of GDP since 1929. And we are in a situation now where the wealthiest 1% of Americans earns far more income than the bottom 50%. Mr. President, in the last number of years, technology has exploded, worker productivity has increased, and yet in the midst of all of that, the middle class is struggling desperately to keep their heads above water, and poverty is increasing. I think the question that this Senate should be spending a lot of time on is answering why that is happening. Why is it that everything being equal, our kids will have, for the first time in the modern history of the United States, a lower standard of living than we do? Why is it that a two-income family today has less disposable income than a one-income family did 30 years ago? Now, in the midst of all of this globalization, all of the explosion of technology, all of the increase in worker productivity, there is more and more economic desperation in the United States of America. And the only people who are doing very well are the wealthiest 1 or 2% of the population. Now, I think that there is a real problem when you have unfettered free trade agreements which essentially allow corporate America to throw American workers out on the street, move to China, move to other low-wage countries, pay people their 50 cents an hour, $1 an hour, and then bring their products back into this country. One of the great crises that we are facing is that we're not building manufacturing plants in the United States, putting people to work at good wages and good benefits. And not only are we losing blue-collar jobs, we're losing white-collar information technology jobs. And millions of parents all over this country are wondering what kind of jobs are available, going to be available for their kids. Now, the fact of the matter is that these free trade agreements have not worked. I don't know how many times and what people need to understand that. Just take a look at NAFTA. I remember, because I was a member of the House during that debate, that the supporters of unfettered free trade told us over and over again that NAFTA would increase jobs in the United States. But according to the Economic Policy Institute, NAFTA has led to the elimination of over 1 million American jobs. Now, why do you want to follow a paradigm, a trade policy approach, which has failed in the past? If it has failed time and time again, why do you keep doing the same thing? A manager of a baseball team who has losing records year after year gets fired. That's what happens. The team changes its approach. Right now, we have a huge trade deficit. It is a growing trade deficit. We are losing good-paying jobs. Pressure on wages is to push them down into a race to the bottom. That is a failed trade policy. Mr. President, supporters of unfettered free trade told us that NAFTA would significantly reduce the flow of illegal immigration into this country. because the standard of living in Mexico would increase. Well, guess what? They were wrong. It didn't happen. As a result of NAFTA, severe poverty in Mexico increased. Didn't go down, it increased. 1.3 million small farmers in that country have been displaced, and real wages for the majority of Mexicans have gone down. All of this has led to a 60% annual increase in illegal immigration from Mexico during the first 6 years of NAFTA alone. But what's happening in Mexico and in the United States and in many other countries today, because of unfettered free trade, is you're seeing a huge increase in the gap between the people on top and everybody else. Give you just one example. In Mexico today, a poor country, a gentleman named Carlos Slim has just surpassed Bill Gates as the wealthiest person in the world, worth over $60 billion in a poor country. And incredibly, because of unfettered free trade and neoliberal type economic policy, Mr. Slim is worth more than the poorest 45 million Mexicans combined. One man has more wealth than the bottom 45%, which happens to be 45 million Mexicans. That's one of the manifestations of unfettered free trade. And the situation is the same as in China. I remember the debate in China. Oh, we got a great market in China, man. We open up permanent normal trade relations with China, going to create all kinds of jobs. Nobody believes that that is true. We have a huge trade deficit with China. The trade deficit was growing. People today are doing Christmas shopping. When they go to the stores, the products that they're going to find from A to Z are made in China, not made in the United States. I could tell you that in my small state of Vermont, we have lost 25% of our manufacturing jobs in the last 6 years. Not just due to trade, but trade has played an important role. All over this country, people are wondering why corporate America is not reinvesting in Pennsylvania or Vermont or the rest of the country. Well, you know why? Because they're investing billions and billions of dollars in China, hiring people there at pennies an hour, and then they bring their products back into this country. And people are wondering, how do you become a great economy? How do you lead the world? How do you have good jobs for your kids if we're not producing the goods that our people purchase? You will remember, Mr. President, that 25 years ago, the largest employer in the United States was General Motors. They produced automobiles. They paid people good wages. They had good benefits. There was a strong union. Today, the largest employer in the United States is Walmart. Low wages, minimum benefits, vehemently anti-union. Now, what I also don't understand in terms of this trade debate is who the Congress thinks that they are representing. You go out in my state, you go all over the country, and people say, we do not like unfettered free trade. If you want to be a political opportunist and you don't care about the issue, you should vote against the Peru trade agreement. That's what the people want you to do. In fact, according to a recent Wall Street Journal NBC News poll, 59% of Republicans believe that unfettered free trade has been bad for the U.S. economy. And a majority of Democrats feel the same way. So I think that maybe the Congress has got to start saying to the CEOs of large corporations, who in fact do very well by unfettered free trade, that our job is not just to represent them, but to represent the working families of this country. This agreement will simply continue a failed trade policy. And Mr. President, you know, because you're a new senator as well, that during the last campaign, many of us raised this issue about unfettered free trade. And what we heard from constituents is, we want a change in trade policy. We want companies to start investing in America, not in China. We are worried about the future. So bottom line here is, I think we have a failed trade policy. I think before we should be passing any more trade agreements, we need to take a hard look at what past trade agreements have done. I think we need a moratorium on them, and I think we need to develop new trade agreements, because trade is a good thing, but new trade agreements to represent the working families of this country, so that we can see our wages and our incomes going up, not going down, our health care benefits going up, not going down, so that we're not engaged in a race to the bottom, so that we're helping poor countries improve their standard of living while our standard of living is going up, not bringing everybody down. So I would hope that the members of the Senate will give serious consideration to rethinking our trade policies and voting this Peru trade agreement down. Thank you, Mr. President, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.